Welcome back to NVTV. We're discussing education, and this is in light of a recent ministerial statement by the Minister of Education on the budgetary requirements for her ministry. With me in the studio to discuss the subject is Mr. Patrick Kawoya, who is the National Secretary of the Federation of Non-State Education Institutions. And on my right here is Mr. Derek Namisi, Acting Principal Economist at the Education Ministry. Before we went to the ad break, I was coming across to my man Derek here. We're coming to a question of private-public partnership. And it's of interest to me because I think that one of the things that has unleashed a lot of energy in the economy and the country generally is the liberalization of the economy Why can't we do the same for education? But we know it's liberalized, but we go a step further because of the importance of education, and we actually partner with private schools to fill the gaps we are failing to fill as government.
Thank you, Paul. First of all, allow me to clarify that government has already been partnering with the private sector, and there's already a public-private partnership arrangement that we have had with them since 2012. It commenced in financial 2012-2013. We have been having, especially for secondary education, it has been on a share of 49-51%, the 51% being government. So you'll see that the private was having a big share as well of our budget, of a budget of about 128 billion. You'll realize that the private sector was taking a huge chunk, and we are allocating at a unit cost of 47,000 per student per term. That is for O-level, and then for A-level we are allocating at 85,000 per student per term.
How does this work?
Paul, it is important to note that it works that we send money per student per term to the school, and then the school can use that money to pay teachers and also to run the school and also purchase instructional materials. That's why the unit cost is higher than the government unit cost. The challenge we have had is this arrangement has been abused greatly over time. Mm-hmm. When you partner with the private sector, you deal with almost 5 kinds of schools. You deal with privately owned schools, private for business, mm-hmm. private for profit. Mm-hmm. You deal with NGO owned schools. You deal with community owned schools. You deal with church owned schools. And
those are 4.
Those are 4. Actually, let's limit ourselves to the 4. Now, those are all in for different intentions. Mm-hmm. Now, over time, from 2012 to now, the arrangement has been greatly abused. We have had
they take your money and don't deliver. We
have challenges where people put profit first before delivering education. So we have got a challenge of inflation of numbers. We have got challenges of absenteeism. We have also got challenges of people who partner with us and their service is really not quality. So we were discussing as a ministry, and there is need to revise and renew the arrangement we had with the public-private, under the public-private partnership. So going forward, we are working with the World Bank to review our arrangement with the public-private partnership. But meantime, government is doing a gradual withdrawal of the public-private partnership and instead constructing schools in sub-counties without. That is 1. 2, we are also grant aiding. Grant aiding is the cheaper option than constructing. Grant aiding means government comes and takes over an existing school in maybe a sub-county without. We pay the salaries and then we pay the capitation grants. But when we look at the public-private partnership, it goes beyond just partnering with secondary schools. Public-private partnership it goes to all the subsectors. We have public-private partnership engagements in the sports, public-private partnerships in BTVET, public-private partnerships in universities. Government is currently supporting private universities as well. So public-private partnership should be looked at widely. Mm-hmm. The one which was most known was the one we had with secondary, which is currently under review. Mm-hmm. And as I explained, when a child goes to a public-private school or a private school, they are not for the private school, they still remain for government. and the education, what remains is the outcomes of that arrangement. So when a child goes to a private school, they still remain for government. And us as government, for us, we are committed on the issue of quality. That explains the reason why government is currently withdrawing and looking at revising the arrangement that we have been having with them. I also wanted to hint on the issue of national teacher policy. Much as national teacher policy was launched, we should also not forget that we are having the TVET policy, which was also passed by cabinet.
Sorry, what's that? You need to spell it out.
The technical vocation and education training policy. Currently, the ministry has, we have been having what we call skilling Uganda. We need a paradigm shift as a country.
From what to what?
We need a paradigm shift to stop making people go from primary, secondary, university, and then office, which was what everyone has been looking at.
So now you want to...
We are now looking at popularizing vocational education. You've heard of the challenge we have been having of unutilized technical institutions. It is very true. Much as our manifesto outlines the vocational institution per constituency and per district, that the supply-led provision of institutions, we should review that. Most of the institutions that we have are under-enrolled. One of the reasons is because of attitude. Others have equipment which is not utilized. Others have instructors who are not trained. Others are just not well staffed. And if you look at our budget for financial 19-20, it is focusing on those areas. We're focusing on recruiting instructors and assistant instructors for those institutions which are not staffed. We are looking at training instructors to utilize equipment where it has been procured and it's lying idle. We are looking at attracting students to engage into these vocational institutions. And when you look at vocational, it is on a number of levels. You have technical schools which take P7 graduates. Community polytechnics take P7 graduates. You have technical institutes which take S4 graduates. You have health training institutions which take S6 graduates. You have colleges of commerce. You have national teachers colleges. All those is what we are encouraging people to venture into. And it seems to be more of an attitude, because when government puts their institutions and the enrollment is underwhelming, it is more of what we need of a paradigm shift. And,
mindset.
Now that's what we are focusing on as a ministry, popularizing this and making sure that people embrace it. This is what the curriculum is looking at.
Okay. Patrick, so for me, I'm a great believer in the private sector, and I think that government should not let it do what it wants, but find a way of leveraging regulation, yes, and regulation, and also policy setting, direction setting, strategy, and all that kind of business. What would happen? Is it a feasible thing? Clearly we have huge gaps. We can't, especially now quality. I think government has done a good job in catching up on the physical. We're still behind, but it's quality that seems to be a challenge. And you were saying earlier that, in private schools, kids don't study on the floor, and teachers are not absent and all that kind of business. What if, hypothetical, let's just think about it. I am sure you people have thought about it. If government said tomorrow, you guys, you know what? We have failed in delivering this service. We will keep regulation, curriculum development, and this private sector take over, but what do you need to make it up? Because the outcome, the output, has to be quality graduates at the end of the day. What do we need to do for you to just take it over?
Thank you for that correct thinking. Because in the spirit of sustainable development goals, in a sustainable manner, we need partnerships that are sustainable. When we talk, for instance, about vocational training institutions, we are looking at equipped institutions. We are looking at tools, we are looking at instructors, we are looking at availability of electricity and internet, ICTs. We are looking at how students interact with real-life objects, maybe into bricklaying or machinery. And we are also looking at how this partnership becomes real Because first of all, as in the private sector, we are looking at results. We have what drives us because we have invested. And it's not that X, Y, and Z are going to pay tax. The money is there available, shall be. No way. You have to work for this money so that it comes. We truly acknowledge that the public-private partnership could have had hiccups here and there. But when you identify gaps, you don't drop or phase. You work along to correct and review and improve so that you don't duplicate to create more structures instead of having the partnership meaningful and sustainable. Also that way, we need to review the unit cost for capitation. That unit cost you find that has spent 10 years without review. Why so? When things have
When
changed,
the reality, economic reality has changed.
have changed and they continue to change. So for me, an honest dialogue that creates meaningful partnership without suspicion should be the way to go if we are chasing 11 years, 2030 to achieve what the rest of our colleagues in the world are focusing to achieve. And in terms of the two policies, the TVET policy and the national teacher policy, the national teacher policy is an overarching policy. Why? Because it defines a university professor, an instructor, a doctor standing to instruct or teach anybody as a teacher. So for him to be able to deliver TVET properly, has to be competent, has to be well profiled, has to have a continuous professional development program, has to have motivation. And all these components I'm talking about are put in the national teacher policy. But the two have to move together and not leaving the other or the other. But what we have to emphasize also is to address the selection. When students are completing P7 and they are going to senior 1 or they have completed senior 4, they are going to another level, we shouldn't treat those who are going to HSC or those who are going to secondary school as the most important and match capital on them. We should be able to sell both areas, the TVET area, the technical vocational education, and the other academic path equally, so that students should be able to choose. And this means that the teachers at secondary school level and at P7 level should offer correct career guidance to these students. Because right now a student in a school knows that I have to go P7, senior 1, senior 2, senior 6 university. Is not offered an option in terms of which career is going to help my parents have a cost-benefit analysis to return this money. Because education is currently very expensive, but a child finishes a cycle, sits down, cannot help himself, has been in school, you have spent just because the career guidance pathway is having issues that we must solve.
Just listening to Patrick speak, I was just thinking to myself that the government seems to be trying to eat its cake and have it. So you're increasing primary, secondary school buildings or facilities and primary school facilities. At the same time, you want what do you call these technical schools to also be there. Yes. The trick is you stop on the secondary schools, then people will be forced to go the other side, because now, as long as I see this route, which I've been sold over in my life, is the right route, that there's an opening, I'll always go there. So you stop here, then you tell people, okay, you failed, you go the other side. I mean, I don't know.
That is an interesting, that's an interesting take. When it comes to education, unfortunately, from the economic perspective, the population votes with its feet. They go where they feel there is service. They go where they feel there is something, a fruit at the end. So they usually go to where they feel, I want my child or my son, my daughter to study, get an office job and get out and be a successful person. But they are successful person, people in the vocational sector. So us as government, you cannot begin using crude methods to force people. The most important thing is to sell to them. Paul, one thing I wanted to bring out is we are all interested in quality education. That is the end goal that we aim to give the population. And in this we have 3 players who are very important, and one is always left out. Government, both at the central and local government level, is one. We have the school which delivers the service. But one critical component is left out, and that is the parent involvement in the child's nurturing and growing up. Many parents are leaving children as long as they give birth and they leave them to the system. You have free primary, you have free secondary, and almost alone at university.
Actually, the reason why is because you're giving free things.
Yes,
you charge them, then you see them stopping.
Most of them have left the education to government, and yet there is one critical component to success of a child in school. That is the issue of school feeding, which is still very costly, and it's still the elephant in the room. Studies have shown that school feeding has a positive correlation to the learning of a child in a school environment and the results that come out. But we still have communities where children go. Actually, we have many communities where children are learning without studying. Much as government injects money in all the areas you're talking of, the hard components, training the teachers, staffing, we're just pouring water in a basket, and we shall not reap anything. So it is high time we also focus on community engagement.
But isn't it possible, I've heard stories in the newsroom, isn't it possible that actually these families who you say are not sending their kids to school with food or what, they have 1 meal a day, so lunch is not one of them. So the kid is fine anyway to eat at supper time.
I beg to disagree.
You disagree?
Yeah, when it comes to the school environment, we can devise a lot of creative ways. We are looking at, actually that's one area where I have a bond to grind with my brother in the private sector. We still have schools which are set up on less than an acre of land. So you find there is no football field, there is no garden, there is no... So because a school in its setup should be having some sort of demonstration garden, and for the upcountry schools, most likely they could have a garden which they could have an arrangement with the parents, grow their own food, eat their success stories, where they grow their own food, the children study, and the outcomes are really different from those who expect to come to the school, study, and expect miracles at the end of the cycle. So parents is something we should look at. How do we engage them in the overall cycle? That is at all subsectors, primary, secondary, and government. Otherwise, you will have children coming and expecting miracles to happen, which will never.
Without feeding them.
Yes, that's why you see the ministry is on and all out when it comes to community engagement and bringing parents within the cycle. But we also are very cognizant of the challenges that we have as government, both by funding and issues of administration. Another aspect of quality that we usually miss out is the issue of inspection. People misunderstand the inspection of those days where an inspector would go and sit in a classroom and police teachers.
They used to do
Times
that?
have evolved. Yes, times have
You
evolved.
don't have enough inspectors to do that.
Times have evolved. Like I said, we have 168 administrative units. Some local governments have over 100 primary schools. Mitiana, for example. So having an inspector doing all that, it becomes very difficult, and yet inspection is your critical link between quality and quantity. So as a ministry, we were exploring how to introduce real-time inspection, and this needs gadgets, this needs software, this needs high-tech investment.
CCTVs in the classroom.
So, no, you could have clocking, you do not have to go CCTVs.
Okay.
You could have clocking, both for pupils and the teachers. And then when people are in class, the learning takes place. We believe these are one of the areas that we should look at. Unfortunately, we have still had a challenge of funding. Otherwise, as a ministry, we remain committed to having quality education, because that is the end goal as we go forward.
Great, great. As I said earlier, I'm a great proponent of the private sector. So I'm a bit worried. I should be asking you, maybe you will have something to say about it. But I hear stories of trying to limit school fees Isn't that a problem for you in the private sector? My feeling is that let the fees float free. It will make it more attractive for investors. The investors will come in. There'll be a lot of competition, and the fees will find their way. These attempts to put the fees down could be counterproductive. If I'm an investor looking in on this thing and on the sector, and then you tell me you're going to be arbitrarily setting fees, I'll not be interested in coming into that place.
In fact, when we look at education, I started with the institutional and policy framework. Education has to be paid for. So there is nothing that's free. Free education. What you call free is delivered by taxpayers.
Yes.
Bringing
somebody
money,
pays.
then
Yes.
government subsidized or offered. So in terms of us in the private sector, we are in a market economy. What drives you to our school is the product that we offer. And sustainably, there should be dialogue or room for engagement where there is dissatisfaction. But also, we are looking at SDG 4, Sustainable Development Goal 4, as quality education. What are the parameters for quality nationally? Have we set them for this sector? So in terms of us in the sector, which is private, I could say electrification, having electricity, having light in the school, that students will read, they will have light, and there will not be indiscipline in the school, that there are dark areas where you cannot track these children, that levels of hygiene, that will go to a school pit latrine and get the hygiene, that your nose won't be covered, that you will see with your eyes, you don't run away. Those are the tangible standards I'm talking about. That you will look around and see classes that are swept, that have people attend to them. I agree with my brother on the issue of a school per acre, but as a federation, we have a program of having community playgrounds. For instance, you should know that students, let's say, of city parents go to Old Kampala and use their playground. So playgrounds that are available are used. But also we are minimizing the effect of land grabbing. You know that land grabbers are now looking at school
As
playgrounds as virgin land for them to take over. So in terms of safeguarding that, because we are the people who want them most for our children to play there, so we have to come in there and safeguard that. But in terms of regulating school fees that are paid, that one cannot happen. What we need to do is to review the Education Act 2008 to openly say education has to be paid for. Parents should have a pay, and don't hide under government is going to produce. No wonder that's the reason we are registering very many school dropouts, because they think everything is free, so it should study for free.
so when they reach a certain place and they have to pay, they drop out.
All it is free. But if it is you who is forking out your hard-earned money, then you demand for accountability.
Yeah.
So there has to be
The quality
demand
of the
and
schools
supply
and what?
for quality, because quality cannot be substituted by any other thing. Quality remains quality.
I don't know whether you are in position to answer my next question, which is related to that one. Is there a thinking, you talked about your PPP engagement with schools. Is it possible to say, I don't know how to put this, is there a discussion to say, look guys, you know, we might not be doing enough in education, but you can say our budget is not enough, we are failing behind pre-agreed terms and all. Why don't we just pull out of provision and we regulate and we regulate? And it might even be cheaper to say that we can even pay schools to take the kids than us trying ourselves to do that. Is it a discussion that is at all being had? Maybe not in the ministry, but in the...
Well, that's an interesting take. But you know, education is a strategic service, and you cannot just have government pull out and leave it to the private sector. I'll give you one area that you should possibly study for engagement. That is the pre-primary education. Pre-primary education is entirely a reserve of the private sector. But over the years, we have had a lot of complaints regarding pre-primary education. You are having challenges of regulating the curriculum, which is there. Government restricted ourselves to policy guidance, but the calls for government to engage actively in pre-primary alone are over the donor partners, the private sector, government. So it is an issue of, like you said, having your cake
and eating
it at the same time. We should look at government participating and the private sector participating, but in a level which does not impede service delivery. If government is to pull out entirely, you risk having a lot of issues, which I would not want to walk into. So what I would look at is a renewed public-private partnership across all levels. Like if you look at pre-primary, very few children access pre-primary, and it has an impact on how they perform thereafter.
So of your 8 million in primary school, what percentage have been through pre-primary?
When you look at pre-primary, it is for those who can afford and those who can't afford. And the 8 million I was mentioning is limited to government. If you stratify the Ugandan population and you look at those who can afford and those who can't afford, you'll find that a good chunk of those under UPE mainly accessed primary without accessing pre-primary.
So what, 80% don't go to pre-primary?
You have pre-primary schools which are charging over 1 million shillings to provide education. Pre-primary schools which are charging 3 million shillings. So you find people just sending children to primary one because they cannot afford.
What, like 80%?
Yeah, and there are calls for government. If you look at the comprehensive gender policy, which was launched, we are looking at government attaching pre-primary section on every government school so that everyone goes through that level. Otherwise, leaving it to the private sector, we are in a capitalistic economy. It is driven by demand and supply forces.
So, but how much percentage of your enrollees have not been to pre-primary? 80%?
That is something I cannot ascertain right now.
Okay.
But you find that most of them do not go through pre-primary.
Unfortunately, we have to bring this discussion to a halt, so I'm going to ask the gentleman, starting with you, Patrick, 1 minute. Your take. The budget has, proposals have been put out. We're waiting for it to be passed by May 15th. You've seen some of it. What do you think?
For me, the budget should be focusing on the priorities that are strategic.
Like
the national teacher policy, the TVET policy, to have them deliver the education in one, but also to look at real-time funding in terms of having the public-private partnership. We shouldn't spend blindly because we have to put structures there. We should partner with those that we have and reserve that money to do better things. And we also need to reduce where we are spending extravagantly and put where it is needed.
Dennis, your last word, 1 minute on the subject.
Mine is a call upon the general public to be interested in where government is investing, especially for education. In conjunction with Ministry of Finance, we have a budget called budget.co.ug. We look at transparency and telling people what we are doing. It is important that the public gets interested in where government is putting money. For next financial year in particular, government is looking at service delivery, the areas that we are looking at. We call upon people to be interested at where government is investing money, and that will hold us and make us more accountable to the public. Otherwise, a lot of things are done and they are never put out there. So it is an appeal to call upon people to be interested in learning, know your budget, especially for the education sector, and I believe we will achieve a lot.
Those final words from my guest, Mr. Derek Namisi, the acting principal economist at the Ministry of Education. Previously, Patrick Kawoyo spoke on his last words, National Secretary to the Federation of Downstate Education Institutions. And I'm Paul Bushariz. I've been your host today on this education panel discussion of the education budget. Until the next time, this has been NVTV. Until the next panel discussion, we'll see you then.